Welcome to Hive Mind Community Podcast, brought to you by TechSoup. Our podcast is a part of the Digital Activism program, through which we provide the civil society with knowledge, tools, grants, and networking opportunities so they can thrive. Welcome. Today we will be talking about data, technology, and bias. Data is all around us and with us, almost every moment. In the digital age, we produce and use huge amounts of data. Does data mirror society and its complexity? Can the digital world offer hope for alternative solutions to inequality? In this episode, we will reflect on these issues with our guest, Kuba Piwowar, a sociologist and cultural scientist who holds a PhD in the humanities. He specializes in the socio-cultural aspects of new technologies, data activism, and research methods. He is professionally engaged in Culture and Media Department at SWPS University and Humanity in Action. Great to have you here, Kuba.
Thank you so much for invitation.
I thought that it would be good to start with the broad question, the general one that have many options how to answer it. Where is the digital world heading right now?
Very difficult question. I think the best way to approach it would be to see where it started, what kind of promises did we get, which of them were fulfilled, which were not. But there was absolutely too many of them. So I will focus on maybe two, which are very close to me and the way in which I work with technology. First is the idea that not only the technology, but internet specifically, will connect more people, which is a very interesting promise. And I remember when Facebook was gaining a lot of attention and more people started joining the service. These were times in which a possibility to talk to your friend who lives, I don't know, you live in Poland, they live in Australia or the US, or even in a different city. This was a very, very interesting promise because it was actually fulfilled instant, on the go, right? You could actually talk to the person and you could use it. It was possible before Facebook. There were different services. My favorite one was Jaiku, which was a mix of Facebook and Twitter. There were closed groups. People could post something, and within the closed group, you could comment on that. You can have a broad discussion about everything and anything. So this promise was first fulfilled, and I think it still holds. Right? We are connected. The question which we are faced with right now are we connected enough? Are we connected with right people? What sort of new connections appeared? Are we seeing too many informations from people, groups, organizations, companies that we don't want to see, right? So with the growth of social media, we are in a point in which new problems arose. And I'm not even mentioning disinformation, right? Which is a different kind of problem with communication technologies. Are we actually having and getting what we really want to get? So are we really closer to people that we want to be close to? I would say that answer to this question, if it was supposed to be yes, it is debatable, right? Some people can say that it's not necessarily the case. The other example is coming from, let's say, the different ways in which culture and cultural consumption is being done. So, for instance, in the past, if you downloaded a movie or a song from a torrent, which was considered as stealing, you were perceived as a thief, right? Somebody, spent a lot of time creating the movie, spent a lot of time creating music. Then they published it somewhere, probably on cassettes or CD players, on CD discs. Somebody digitalized them, and then somebody else, without paying, downloaded that, right? So we have a very specific version of consuming culture, which back then was perceived as something not good. Whereas today, with much more people connected to the internet who actually create a lot of stuff, write blogs, create their pictures and digitize them, right? Post their own pictures on different social media or wherever. Suddenly, these let's say, I wouldn't call them art forms, but let's say these products that people create are suddenly being used by other companies to train their models of, large language models or computer vision models. So without asking for permission, we are suddenly becoming people whose data, whose creations are being stolen. So I gave these 2 points just to show how difficult the discussion about this topic can be. And I would say that in the future, we, especially in the European context, we will see many more discussions about regulations and how can we not necessarily be a step ahead of technology, because I don't think that this will ever happen, but how can we approach regulating tech in a very smart way, not only to make sure that consumers, citizens are protected, but also that companies can actually innovate, right? So we have to juggle between these 2 topics. And I would say that especially in the European context, regulations will be the main topic in the coming years, especially from the context of recent regulations that DSM, DMA, AI Act, etc., etc., etc.
Do you think that those tendencies that are observed in Europe will have the global influence? Because this is the questions. The most technological companies are in other sides of the world. Yep. They, of course, have to adapt some way, but they don't adapt at the global level because, for example, the social media platforms, due to the new regulations, EU updated their terms of service and the privacy policy in terms of Europe, but not generally. So I would like to ask you, what do you think about it? Is still Europe the part of the world that other regions are looking for inspiration, or is it like the old auntie or uncle that used to be cool, but now is nothing interesting there?
Yeah. I think that regulations became like an exporting good in terms of technology. There is a book titled Designed in California, Made in China, Regulated in Europe. Which basically shows how the overall, like very simplistic but overall view on technology looks like. I wouldn't agree with the sentence that you didn't say that, but you suggested that maybe only European countries regulate technology. After we introduced GDPR, a lot of countries outside of Europe started replicating the law, because it is. Like maybe the implementation itself is not perfect. Maybe the idea could be corrected in some places, but the general idea around this particular topic is something that I think that we are agreeing that basically users' privacy, even in China, even in in the US, should somehow be protected. Not only to make sure that we as citizens are being protected from malicious intents of like other countries or corporations, but also it could be considered as something that is a national security issue, right? So if we are not protecting our citizens, we are potentially susceptible to some different attacks. So I would say that we are actually exporting regulations, and it is hard for me to say in which direction they will go in the distant future. But from now, as of now, I would say that especially privacy is really important, and protecting users' privacy is really important in what governments are trying to do. And to answer your question, if we are going to have like a unified global approach to privacy, absolutely no, and it should never be the case. Well, mostly because privacy is being defined differently in different cultures, right? Privacy for us means something different than to Germans. You can open Google Maps, you can have a layer of where Street View is, and you will see that it's pervasive in Europe without Germany and Austria, right? So we do have different approach to privacy. We approach this topic differently in China, which has like different cultural background. So I would say that when we talk about regulations, I would leave them at a at a country level, potentially within European context at the EU level as well, because it helps to actually to have the scale to propose something that can be potentially perceived as worth noting by huge corporations who are in many times bigger than any country you can imagine.
Thank you. And this is the thing that I really like that I heard, because sometimes there is a tendency of thinking, oh, this is only the law that's influenced, like, I don't know, 1-2 country. But this is the case of the exporting that you just said, and about like influencing and then adapting. So not to try to copy paste exact law, but because it would not work, because it wouldn't make sense in the context. So thank you for this, and I think this is a very nice ground to go to our next question. The regulations in EU was proposed due to the observed by social movements, by NGO sector and activists, harms that the digital sphere was doing. And I wanted to ask you, what is algorithmic bias? Could you introduce to us how can it be defined?
Interesting pivot from the privacy perspective, yes. My approach to researching and understanding and explaining algorithmic bias is not coming from like computer science perspective, just to be clear, because it's a notion which is like well established there, and it's something that has been known for many years. In social sciences, first paper I found by Helen Nissenbaum, a researcher who also researches privacy, by the way, was from mid-90s, from the previous century. So it's not that young, but the interest in algorithmic bias as a, let's say, social technological phenomenon starts like 5-10 years ago. And in short, it is a situation in which algorithms implemented in some solution, I don't know, a banking scoring system, an application to recognize faces, right? So this algorithm is biased towards something, like I don't see people who have darker skin, or I have troubles saying what am I seeing, and the reason for which the trouble is there is because data are more skewed towards men. Or I do have not sufficient data. My data set is not diverse enough, so I struggle with properly representing needs of a specific part of a community. So, in short, algorithmic bias is a technology that, at scale, discriminates against different groups of people because of different technical reasons.
As this definition is quite long with us, because it's 30-something years, so it's a good age of a definition, I would say. Do you have any other terms you would like to share, or algorithmic bias is enough? Meaning that do we differ different types of algorithmic bias, or different phenomena that are referring or cooperating, let's say, with this specific?
Well, so just to keep it plain, algorithmic bias is not something that is inherently bad, right? From technical perspective, you can bias your algorithm just because you know that data set is not very diverse. So you bias the algorithm so that it, makes it more even, makes it more inclusive in the output of what algorithm is doing. So, as I said, algorithmic bias is not inherently bad, but in situations which I observed, I researched, in many cases, algorithmic bias is not always, but usually a representation of how society is being unequal in many cases. So if you think of any inequality, like, I don't know, poverty, being black, being a woman, being older, having or not having access to the internet, or even, I don't know, in some cases of algorithmic bias, we also know that living next to someone who has been in jail. These data points can be easily caught by algorithms and all the models that are being built, and conclusions can be made just based on that. So you as a person who approaches, let's say, a system, like, I don't know, you go to a bank or you go to jail or you go, I don't know, you apply for a job somewhere, there might be, and most probably there is some algorithm, some system, some model which assesses your CV, assesses the way in which you respond to answers, assesses the way in which you look, etc., etc. And there is a plethora of different situations in which pervasiveness of algorithmic bias has been proven. For instance, this is one of the most controversial examples. In the streets of London, I guess, the police used a algorithm to recognize people's faces, right? So it's basically a camera that you point to the street, and then the system randomly selects a person who should be checked more thoroughly, right? So there is a policeman coming out of the car, stopping the person and saying that I have to stop you because you have been selected for a random search. What scientists observed was that majority of the people stopped for additional search were people who were not white. And we can say, okay, so the system is racist, or maybe the policeman who was in the car was racist because maybe they didn't want to additionally search for white people. But the truth is that the system was trained based on different types of data that the computer scientist gave it, and these data were basically skewed towards white people. So, how do these systems work? Basically, if you commit a crime, whatever it is, you can steal something, you can, I don't know, have a gun without permit, etc., etc. If you do something, there is a track record of this crime, right? But it's not only what has been done, but who did it. Was it a woman? Is it a person who is black? What age the person is? Where do they live? So we have a lot of data aside of the data, just the information about the crime. And if we have enough of them, we can, make inferences. We can see that people of this age are more likely to be doing this. These parts of our city are more safe, and these are less safe, etc., etc. But the truth is that the data that we are using for training algorithms are not data of crimes. These are data of registered crimes, right? So we don't have some information about crimes where, let's say, police is not being sent to check if everything's okay. Where police is not going very often? To rich communities, right? Does it mean that there is no crime in there? Obviously there is, but it's not being recorded. So based on this data set, we can say that, let's say, if you are more poor, if you are poor, you're more likely to commit a crime. If you are black, you are more likely to commit a crime. So if we ingest this kind of data into a training algorithm, and we use it for searching people in the streets, the system will randomly select people who the system thinks will be more likely to potentially commit a crime. That's why these people have been stopped in most cases, and that's why it's such a big problem, because we basically do not know what exactly to do with it.
This is a big question, I would say, because I was going through my questions and thinking how to link it, and actually, is there any technology that is more complex, not like the very easy one, that is not using algorithmic bias?
I would say that it's not that it's using. I would say that algorithmic bias is something that it has to be accounted for when you create any technology and any model and any algorithm. So, because the bias can come not only from the data that you use for training, it can be present in the way in which algorithm is being written, in the way in which the whole technology is being thought of. So, for example, I wouldn't call it algorithmic bias. I would probably call it like some sort of an excluding technology. I think the most interesting example still not sure if it's true or not, but it's interesting because it actually happened, was I think 10 years ago when Apple introduced Apple Watch, and they introduced alongside SDK, which is software's development kit. And the device itself had like a lot of functions that could help you, monitor your health. And there was like a lot of functions for, heart rate, things with BMI, etc., etc. So what journalists noticed, what Apple Watch didn't have was menstrual calendar. And it's really interesting because we actually don't know what happened, but there are a lot of speculations. So the most interesting, maybe not interesting, but the most, I would say, easy one is that probably there was like a group of men working on Apple Watch. They didn't think of adding that, so it wasn't there, right? So it is not a algorithmic bias per se, but it's something that is embedded into technology that actually has effect on a large amount of people who are going to use this technology. I call it excluding technologies because it's a little bit more broad than just algorithmic bias. Algorithmic bias itself is mostly refers to what algorithms do with the data that they get.
Okay, so better to focus on excluding technology then, because this is the topic that we really wanted to introduce to our community, as we live in tech, we live in a world of data. So what other exclusionary practices we can observe in technology and internet in general?
Yeah. So I gave you an example of how a computer vision system can discriminate against Black people in selecting those for additional search. We know that some data, and this is like also a very interesting example, showing how algorithm that was used by Amazon to select candidates for work. How did it work? So what computer scientists in Amazon did was they had a bunch of CV from different people, and they said, these are our employees. We want more of people like that, right? So we have the data, we have the algorithm. The algorithm then is being used to scan for new CVs. And it worked in a way that it actually promoted more men to be selected to the work, right? Why? Because, people who worked at Amazon were mostly men. So it must be from algorithm. Algorithm isn't like, a very reflective entity, or critical entity. It just says, this works, you want it to work this way, then here you go. You have to choose men, mostly men, to keep up with the efficiency that you're currently seeing. Another example would come from less concrete but more abstract sphere, which is how society is being how society looks like right now. And I know that it is very broad and abstract, but let me just give you an example. We can ask ourselves, who is responsible for creating technologies, right? So we can ask ourselves, who actually decides that this particular application is being released, right? What sort of functions are there? Are we including functions which we haven't thought of because we didn't know they were necessary, etc., etc.? So if we have an application or a website or any technology that there is, are we actually certain that all the decisions that we made will give us the result that we actually want? So for instance, if we create a website, which is, e-commerce store, are we actually perfectly sure that all of the people we want to target will be able to use this website? So for instance, if we are having a shop which is aimed at, people age 60 plus, because we have some products for a little bit less young people, are we sure that it is accessible enough for them? So if they open our website and our shop on the desktop or on the laptop, will they be able to use it? If they use, and we know that a lot of older people use smartphones, will they be able to use it? Will the buttons will be big enough, etc., etc.? So is not only the way in which we think about the, let's say, back end of technology, the data, the algorithms, but also the front end of technology. So how accessible it is for people to use it. And the idea of accessibility of technology doesn't necessarily have to come from technology perspective, right? It is a thought which says, I am building something that is being used by a lot of people, hopefully those people who I want to target, but other people will also use it, whom I haven't thought of, but they will be a very good client of mine. So how do I make sure that these people are also taken care of? That's why we design different ways of interacting with a website for people who don't see, or different ways of interacting with a website for people who struggle with a specific language. So if you have a Polish store, but you suddenly notice that your products are being really popular in, Czechia or Hungary, how do you make sure that is also accessible to them? So I would say that it is more about how we think about approaching other people in the products and services that we build, rather than pure and easy or difficult, but pure technical solutions.
Getting a little bit back on those tech and models that are behind. You talk a lot about tech companies and the proprietary, let's say, software. We also touch upon of regulations. Do you think we should add someone else to the list of those who decides how data is collected, structured, and used?
Yeah, I would answer that question on a higher level. Should we build technology in a way that it includes people from vulnerable communities? And the answer is yes. Is it simple? Absolutely not. So how would that work? So I don't know. I imagine that it will be difficult for a small project that takes 6 months to finish, and involves 3 people, to include representatives from 25 different minority groups who will be potentially using the product or service I'm building, right? So at this level, it would probably not work. Although I can think of systemic approach of a company, big company like Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Nvidia, whatever, who that this approach would at some point of the design process actually include these people. And by include these people, I don't mean doing research with them, asking them questions and having a consumer feedback, but to actually invite them to the room where the technology is being created, to actually invite them maybe as employees, maybe as vendors, maybe as external consultants, but also vet your technology within the community that potentially can be affected by it. Not only to search for things that you haven't thought of because you didn't see them because you're coming from a different perspective, but also to maybe search for some new opportunities. Not only how to make sure that our technology doesn't make any harm, but also how to create a technology that is more beneficial for other people. That can be only known through proper work in the field, with the communities that you are working.
And moving into more inclusive and equity society, let's say, how else can we detect bias and exclusion in technology, and especially exclusion in technology, especially AI that is rapidly growing, and a lot of talks are around, thinking also about NGOs, activists that are doing things around what they should look for in their work in terms of
So this is a very interesting problem, because it cannot be solved by proposing a project at a European Union level, or only by tech companies self-regulating themselves. It has to be a common thing that we try to understand how can we approach it the best. And I will start my answer with saying that I do not think that algorithmic bias is something that we can get rid of. Not only because not because it's something that it's so bad, but the technology is so necessary that we have to agree on some collateral damage, but because hey, we are people. We do have stereotypes. We are also biased. But technology in general helps. But we have to understand how can we, join our forces to detect algorithmic bias in situations where it appears, prevent it from appearing, especially at the company level who builds it, but also how to create like a broader framework for making sure that people have a place, an institution, a group, organization, where they can go and appeal if something bad happens, right? So this is like a joint effort of different instances. So companies should be involved in making sure that what they do is actually like legal, but also like takes into consideration different ways in which algorithmic bias can be present in their tech. There should be also governments regulating that. There should be citizens being more aware about the problem, not only about algorithmic bias itself, but also about how technology is involved in the decision making that affects them. So, for instance, if I go to a bank, I would like to know that a decision about a loan that I'm applying for is a decision partially made by a computer, right? And I would like to understand what sort of data were used to make that decision, and if there's anything I can change in my, financial behavior to make sure that in the future, if I don't get the loan in the first place, in the future I will potentially get it. But I also like thinking that when we look at the history of situations in which technology was caught in the act, right? Something went wrong, like Cambridge Analytica, or using technology that is racist, or using technology or using different types of data which excludes women, etc., etc. When we think about these situations, we notice that people who were so-called whistleblowers were mostly people who represented some kind of minority. So these were queer people, these were women, these were people of color, these were people of different ethnic background, different to, let's say, Caucasian one. So thinking about that and merging that thought with an idea of, let's say, activist approach, this is also, from my perspective, a very interesting thing, because activists not only have a cause that stands behind them, have, let's say, motivation, should also ideally get access to proper resources to, do their work, to hold companies accountable, to make sure that we as a public opinion know about different practices that companies do that are harmful for us, so that we can actually, pressure these companies to stop doing that, etc., etc. So when we think about this, maybe not complicated, but quite complex idea and world of cooperation between different companies, governments, civil society groups, citizens themselves, etc., we have maybe not a solution, but an idea, framework that we can use to work towards a better technology.
Thank you for describing this landscape of who should get engaged to make it happen. And I wanted to ask you, do you observe any of these movements or structures nowadays that give hope for a complex or step-by-step approach in terms of the excluding technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are many data activism projects which I find really, really interesting. And what I mean by data activism, this is very interesting, because there is no single definition of data activism. It can be, a person who knows how to code and how to scrape data from internet, and they use it to put pressure on companies, right? So this is data activism because we use data, and this is like an activism, let's say, endeavor. But also, like, in the most radical way in which activism can be thought of, it's, a group of people trying to shut down a data center, right? Or throw a rock at Google Bus or whatever. Because this is like a form of this is a form of resistance towards, let's say, big tech, right? And how can we use the technology that they're building and data they are gathering to fight their practices that we consider being malicious? But also it can mean that we see that there are a lot of data, or there are not so many data, which should be there, and because they would be helpful. How can we approach that? How can we gather them? How can we use technology to make sure that, I don't know, specific groups of people are being visible? So, for instance, during the current, unfortunately, crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border, there is a lot of discussion about how can we properly gather data about this crisis. So how many people are there, how many people need what exactly, how many people died, how many people were refused help, etc., etc. Because, well, in our world, only with data we can use it as a leverage, as an argument, or as a data point in an argument with the government to actually push for a specific change. So to wrap this up, I would say that data activism is mostly about using data in different ways, either to fight for something, to fight against something, somebody, some company, or to create something that can be helpful and beneficial to the society broadly. So these data activism projects, they span across different topics. It can be, for instance, using data by a local community, gathered with a device that they actually bought by themselves to measure speed of the cars in a road, right? So let's say that we have a community, there is a road, there is a school, and there are different buildings and homes. And what the community noticed is that the cars are speeding there, so it's not safe for their kids to actually go to school safely. So they go to the authorities, they ask for something to do, like, I don't know, traffic lights, or a device that will measure the speed of the car and actually find these drivers, etc. The authorities say no, there is no such need. But we need some data. So what the community does is they create, buy the device, measure the speed of the cars, and come with something robust, like something specific. Okay, so this is on average, we have 2,000 cars going through the street on every day. 85% of these cars speeding more than 30% over the speed limit, right? So this is a very interesting approach to that. Is that something that can be considered as scientifically robust and proper? And is it something that can be signed off easily by the authorities? Not necessarily, right? Because it has to be in some, let's say, framework system that actually could help with creating and vetting that data, if they're okay or not. If there is nobody trying to influence the result of this measurement. But it's one of the steps that we can use to actually change the world. And the way in which I think about it is mostly through channeling the grassroots movement and the grassroots energy and motivation towards something good, but also mostly for creating something that is bigger and has a bigger scale of potential effects. So to put it in simple words, we should protect and help our activists and activist groups so that they can do their job using their passion, knowledge, expertise, etc., so that concrete, specific policy changes can be proposed, which will be beneficial for the broader society. And there are a lot of projects like that. I highly recommend just typing data activism projects into Google, and you will see a lot of them. My favorite example is a project called, it's not a project, it's actually a group that creates a lot of projects. They're called Tactical Tech, and they're based in Berlin, and they do a lot of very interesting projects around data privacy, data detox, things like that.
Thank you for this recommendation, and really, I will do this for sure after our talk, and highly recommend it. And thank you for these examples and all the definition. And I thought that before you become data activism, you have to be data literate. And I wanted to ask you about the other definition that is not so popular, I would say, comparing to media literacy and digital literacy. That is somewhere around in discourse, also with NGO work and activism work in terms of education. your work also explored data literacy. Could you explain us what is data literacy, and should we talk about it separately as a separate thing to make it the most understandable and inclusive in terms of knowledge, or should we link it together with the digital and media literacy and make it a whole?
It depends on who you ask, but media literacy, information literacy, digital literacy, and data literacy have some overlap, but they also have some specific, things that describe them that make them unique. With data literacy, we also tend to say not only data literacy per se, but we say literacy in the age of data. And why is it important? Well, mostly because we as a society started noticing that data is very important. Do we like it? I don't know if people like it, but do we like data? I would say the majority don't like data. When I talk to my students who are cultural science students, so mostly humanists, when I tell them at my first classes that we'll be doing a lot of data analysis, they become really anxious and really sad because data analysis is not something for them. This is not why they chose, cultural studies. And then we start to unpack this idea of what data is. It doesn't have to be very difficult statistical functions or whatever. It doesn't have to include, but should. It doesn't have to include programming, but should, because it's easy. It doesn't have to include super high-level mathematics or super low-level mathematics. No. So when I talk to my students about data, what I would like to show them is that data literacy does not include proper maths. It doesn't. It can, but it doesn't have to. It includes gaining some level of sensitivity to how they approach the world. Because during my classes, during the first class, I always say that everybody is a data analyst. And I give an example of people waking up and deciding what to wear. When you do it, you basically gather a lot of data, like what's the weather like? What am I going to do throughout the day? Is it going to rain? So should I take an umbrella? Is it hot? Is it warm? Is it whatever? What do I have in my closet, etc., etc.? So you actually gather a lot of data. You create a model based on these data, and then you make a decision, right? So we do it, but we just use different types of data. They don't have to be numeric. So data literacy to me is this kind of competence that also, when you want to learn it or teach it, should involve also the ability to talk about data. So when you see a data set, doesn't have to be numeric, whatever data set. When you see, an article that has a lot of references to different metrics and KPIs. When you see a report on, GDP in Poland, data literate person will be able to understand it from a broader perspective, not only as a number, but also trying to understand how can I connect GDP to how my work is contributing to GDP. Or it can mean something like I had a bunch of conversations about how to invest my money, and based on these conversations, I make a conclusion that these are 3 tools that I will use. This is also data analysis that you're doing, right? You're talking to your friends, you're searching Google, you're listening to podcasts, reading financial advisory books, and these are your data points. And based on these data points and your analytical capabilities, you are making a decision. Is it good? Is it bad? Time will tell. But this is something that we basically all do. But now we have to, create a proper framework around it and make sure that we can use it in all of the situations in which we are involved in. And I'm saying that because it's really important from the perspective of the thing that I didn't speak before, which is disinformation. So it is really easy to be deceived by a person who wants to disinform us, because some of the data that we are seeing are actually true, right? This is how disinformation works. Not that everything in disinformation is not true. Some part of it is true. but are we critical enough to assess the data point? Is there maybe a context that has been, conveniently removed from the information that would give us more context to understand this data point? Maybe there should be some other questions that we should ask, that we should not be scared to ask, or to search for, or maybe some data to search for, so that we can better understand what the person is trying to tell us. I think that data literacy, but also media literacy in general, in the digital world is really, really important, especially in connection with critical thinking.
Thank you. And with higher level of this literacies, but also literacy in the age of data, the more conscious and aware society comes to push and to propose new solutions. At the end of our conversation, I have one question, getting back to data activism, that I wasn't sending you. So this is the new one, I would say. This is the surprise part. And thinking about futures, you shared some reflections about future, but I thought that I could propose you some imagination futuristic exercise at the end of our conversation.
Let's speculate, yeah.
Let's speculate a bit. If you could imagine a data activism movement that reaches its goal, according to the values and missions, what would this future look and work like? You can share an idea of the data set tool or maybe something futuristic from today's point of view.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with directors of one of the NGOs in Poland. She said that her goal as a director of this NGO is to close this NGO. What does it mean? Because if we close our NGO, it means that what we wanted to do, we actually achieved it, right? This is a very beautiful way of saying how NGOs should actually finish doing what they're doing, because we will live in just, equitable, and equal world. It will never happen. That's why activism will always be important part of society. But if I were to imagine how this world would look like, so I would say activists will be less needed. They will always be important, but they will be less needed when the broader society becomes more aware in the ways in which technology works. I'm not talking only about data activists, obviously. More aware in the way in which companies in general work, because data activism doesn't necessarily have to be connected to technology. It can be, understanding how capitalism is built and how me buying a specific product is actually endorsing some political movement over here. Do I want to do it? Do I want to is there anything I can do? I can change in my behavior, in my, customer behavior that will help to eventually make the world a better place. So I would see that the more people are aware of how the world operates thanks to data activists, the less their job will be needed, but it still will be important. But I think that we are coming to a point. No, we're not coming to a point. We're actually, what we're doing is we're accelerating towards even more data that will feed algorithms, AI, etc. So we'll need more people who will actually be able to help us understand them, right? So we will have a much more need for people who actually know how to gather data, how to analyze them. So I would say that the future of data activism is more people become data activists, not only to protect or to change the world, but also to help us understand it. I don't have to consider myself a person who will use Python to do something. I can have my son, my daughter, my partner, my fiance, whatever, my mother, my father, to help me understand the world because they are good in it. But I still think that we do not have enough data activists, and to have them, we should teach proper amount of people not only how to understand data, but how to like, draw conclusions based on these data. Because activism itself cannot be taught, I think. This is something that has to come from the inside, from, I don't know, being pissed off about something and a necessity to change it and make it work.
Thank you. I think it's a very good closure of our conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this talk, for this podcast. I learned a lot, and it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Looking for more resources in topics like countering disinformation, cybersecurity, personal and organizational resiliency, building positive narratives, or media literacy? Visit the HiveMind platform, an online hub with free content, tools, online courses, and ability to connect with digital activists across the globe. Embrace the power of community with HiveMind.